You wake up every day carrying a silent weight that no one sees, a pressure behind your eyes, a tightness in your chest, a voice in your head that never stops questioning your worth. You move through crowds yet remain invisible. You speak, yet feel unheard. You smile, yet feel nothing. Loneliness does not always mean being alone. Sometimes it means being surrounded by people who do not understand you, who do not see you, who do not care. Slowly, you learn to hide your pain, to swallow your anger, to mask your fear. And in that silence, your identity begins to erode. You start shaping yourself to fit expectations. You bend your truth to avoid rejection. You censor your thoughts to avoid conflict. Until one day, you no longer know who you are. The world does not reward honesty. It rewards control. It does not protect innocence. It exploits it. Every emotional wound becomes a weakness someone else can use. Every attachment becomes a chain. Every hope becomes leverage. And without realizing it, you become a product of silent conditioning, trained to seek approval, trained to fear isolation, trained to obey invisible rules. This is not weakness. This is programming. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The first chain is never visible. It feels warm. It feels safe. It feels human. It wraps itself around your heart slowly, softly, like a promise. You do not notice the weight at first. You call it love. You call it loyalty. You call it connection. But deep down, it is dependency. And dependency is the oldest form of captivity. Emotional attachment does not arrive as a threat. It arrives as comfort. It whispers that you are not alone. It tells you that someone finally sees you. And in that moment of emotional relief, your mind lowers its defenses. You open the gates. You expose your vulnerabilities. You reveal your fears. You give access to your softest parts. And that is when the prison begins to build itself from the inside. Because once something has emotional power over you, it no longer needs force. It only needs your hope. It only needs your fear of loss. It only needs your hunger to be accepted. You start adjusting your behavior. You start filtering your words. You start calculating your reactions. Not because you are weak, but because you are attached. And attachment creates negotiation with your own soul. You slowly trade authenticity for security. You trade truth for approval. You trade independence for belonging. And with every trade, your inner freedom shrinks. The mind craves certainty. It craves emotional anchors in a chaotic world. But those anchors become chains the moment your sense of identity depends on them. When someone's presence becomes necessary for your emotional stability, your power begins to leak. When their validation becomes fuel for your self-worth, your spine begins to soften. When their absence creates anxiety, you are no longer in control of your inner world. You become reactive. You become careful. You become manageable. And the world feeds on manageable people. Emotional attachment teaches you to hesitate. It teaches you to pause before speaking. It teaches you to doubt your instincts. It teaches you to compromise your boundaries. It makes you question your own perceptions because losing connection feels more terrifying than losing yourself. This is how emotional prisons function. They do not lock the door. They convince you to stay inside. Every human bond carries invisible leverage. The deeper the bond, the sharper the leverage. Because emotional attachment creates stakes, and stakes create vulnerability. The more you care, the more you can be hurt. The more you invest, the more you can be controlled. The more you love, the more power you hand over. This is not cruelty. This is mechanics. Human nature does not operate on fairness. It operates on influence. And influence grows where emotional dependence lives. People who do not need much cannot be controlled easily. People who need deeply can be steered with precision. Their moods become predictable. Their reactions become programmable. Their fears become buttons. And once someone learns your emotional map, they can walk through your psyche without resistance. You begin to notice how often you wait. Waiting for replies. Waiting for approval. Waiting for reassurance. Waiting for recognition. Waiting to be chosen. Waiting to be understood. And every moment of waiting pulls you further away from your center. Your mind becomes occupied by imagined scenarios. You rehearse conversations. You replay memories. You construct hopes. You design expectations. And when reality does not meet them, pain follows. But instead of questioning the attachment, you question yourself. You ask what you did wrong. You ask what you could have done better. You ask how you can be more pleasing, more acceptable, more needed. Slowly, the relationship becomes a silent training program. It conditions you to shrink, to soften, to adapt, to submit, not openly, subtly, through emotion, through fear of disconnection, through the desire to remain significant in someone else's world. This is how emotional captivity bypasses logic. You know something feels wrong. You sense the imbalance. You feel the internal resistance. Yet you stay, because the emotional bond has rewritten your priorities. It has placed preservation of connection above preservation of self. It has taught you that losing them would hurt more than losing your dignity. And that calculation traps millions of people in psychological cages they defend passionately. They justify disrespect. They rationalize neglect. They normalize emotional starvation. All because attachment has convinced them that absence equals death. And once the mind equates emotional loss with existential threat, it will tolerate almost anything to avoid it. There is a quiet erosion that happens when attachment deepens. Your standards begin to blur. Your boundaries begin to dissolve. You start accepting conditions you once rejected. You tolerate behaviors you once despised. You explain away patterns that once alarmed you. You become a negotiator of your own values. Not because you changed, but because attachment creates fear, and fear makes compromise feel necessary. The strongest manipulation does not come from external pressure. It comes from internal terror. Terror of abandonment. Terror of isolation. Terror of being unseen. Terror of emotional emptiness. These fears do not scream. They whisper. And those whispers guide your decisions more than your principles ever could. Over time, emotional attachment becomes identity fusion. You no longer experience yourself as a separate entity. You experience yourself as a role within a dynamic. You become the lover, the friend, the supporter, the provider, the rescuer, the listener, the fixer, and those roles slowly replace your individuality. You define yourself by what you offer, not by what you are. Your worth becomes transactional. Your existence becomes conditional. You feel valuable only when needed. You feel alive only when useful. And this is the most efficient prison ever built, because the prisoner becomes emotionally invested in maintaining the bars. There is a particular pain in realizing that the deeper you care, the less power you have. Not because care is weakness, but because unbalanced care creates asymmetry. When you care more, you lose leverage. When you invest more, you risk more. When you attach more, you expose more. And the world instinctively exploits asymmetry. Not always maliciously, sometimes unconsciously. But power always flows toward emotional neutrality. Those who can walk away hold control. Those who cannot are already defeated, even before the conflict begins. This is why emotional detachment has always been associated with authority. Kings, generals, strategists, rulers. They learned early that emotional distance preserves clarity. Not because they lacked feeling, but because feeling clouds judgment. Emotional attachment bends perception. It distorts reality. It filters truth through desire. It replaces observation with hope. And hope is the most dangerous drug. Hope keeps people in broken systems. Hope keeps people loyal to collapsing structures. Hope keeps people waiting for change that never comes. And emotional attachment feeds hope relentlessly. The mind in attachment mode becomes a storyteller. It invents futures. It romanticizes struggles. It reframes pain as growth. It paints sacrifice as virtue. It glorifies endurance. And through these stories, it justifies continued submission. You tell yourself that suffering is temporary. That effort will be rewarded. That patience will fix everything. That loyalty will be recognized. And while you wait inside these narratives, time passes, energy drains, identity erodes. But you remain, because leaving would require admitting that your emotional investment was misplaced. And the ego cannot tolerate that loss. Attachment also blinds you to power shifts. You fail to notice when respect declines. You miss the moment when effort becomes expected. You overlook the transition from appreciation to entitlement. Because your emotional lens softens the edges. It protects your bond by protecting illusions. You defend those who hurt you. You justify those who neglect you. You minimize your own pain. And in doing so, you teach the world how to treat you. At its deepest level, emotional attachment is not about others. It is about the void inside you. The hunger to be seen. The craving to be understood. The fear of insignificance. The terror of solitude. These forces shape your bonds more than love ever could. And until that void is confronted, every attachment becomes a potential prison. Because you are not connecting from strength. You are connecting from need. And need always negotiates downward. The most dangerous attachment is the one that feels irreplaceable. The one that convinces you that without this person, this bond, this connection, your life would collapse. That belief alone gives away total control. Because once something becomes irreplaceable, it becomes sacred. And sacred things are never questioned. You stop analyzing. You stop evaluating. You stop measuring reciprocity. You become blind to imbalance. You sacrifice reason for preservation. And in doing so, you surrender your autonomy piece by piece, until you no longer recognize the shape of your own will. Detachment, in contrast, does not mean coldness. It means sovereignty. It means the ability to observe without drowning, to feel without surrendering, to connect without disappearing. But emotional attachment does the opposite. It dissolves your edges. It merges your identity into another's orbit. It makes you gravitationally dependent. And gravity always pulls downward when imbalance exists. The more deeply you attach, the more you fear disruption. And fear of disruption creates stagnation. You stay in situations long after they have expired. You cling to dynamics long after they have decayed. You tolerate patterns long after they have proven destructive. Because leaving would mean confronting emptiness. And emptiness feels unbearable to the conditioned mind. So you choose familiar suffering over unknown freedom. You choose predictable pain over uncertain possibility. You choose captivity over solitude. This is the hidden cruelty of emotional attachment. It does not shatter you instantly. It wears you down slowly. It reshapes your self-concept. It teaches you that your emotional stability depends on external validation. It trains your nervous system to associate peace with presence and anxiety with absence. And once that association is formed, your inner world is no longer self-governed. It becomes externally regulated. You are calm only when approved. You are stable only when connected. You are confident only when affirmed. And that is the definition of psychological imprisonment. Over time, you begin to measure your worth through reactions, through attention, through responsiveness, through tone, through gestures, through microsignals. You analyze text lengths, voice inflections, facial expressions, delays, silences. You become a detective of emotional cues, scanning constantly for signs of acceptance or rejection. And this hyper-awareness keeps your nervous system in perpetual alert. You are never fully relaxed, never fully grounded, never fully present, because your emotional safety is always conditional. Attachment also amplifies pain beyond proportion. A minor shift feels catastrophic. A small distance feels like abandonment. A brief silence feels like rejection, because your emotional balance is tied to their proximity. And this creates emotional volatility, high highs, low lows, intense joy, crushing despair. The nervous system swings wildly, and in that instability, rational judgment collapses. You react, you plead, you over-explain, you overextend, you overgive, and every excess deepens the imbalance further. Eventually, you start living in a psychological economy of scarcity. You feel you must earn affection. You must prove worth. You must maintain relevance. You must stay useful. And this scarcity mindset keeps you trapped in performance. You perform kindness. You perform strength. You perform patience. You perform loyalty. But rarely do you experience authentic presence. Because authenticity risks rejection. And rejection feels like annihilation to the attached mind. This is why emotional attachment is the first prison. Not because connection is wrong, but because unconscious connection enslaves. Because unexamined bonds dominate. Because unmet inner needs distort relationships. Because emotional hunger creates dependency. And dependency creates power asymmetry. Once you see this, you begin to notice it everywhere. In friendships, in families, in romantic bonds, in workplaces, in social hierarchies. You see how emotional leverage shapes behavior, how approval steers actions, how fear of exclusion enforces conformity, how belonging becomes currency. And you realize that most human movement is not driven by ambition or principle, but by the need to stay emotionally anchored. But there is a deeper layer still. The realization that emotional attachment not only traps you in others, but traps you in past versions of yourself. You become attached to memories, to identities, to roles, to narratives, to who you once were. And that attachment prevents evolution. You cling to outdated self-images. You resist necessary destruction. You fear losing familiar forms, even when they no longer serve you. And so you remain small, contained, predictable, safe, while potential withers behind the bars of nostalgia. The most dangerous prison is the one you decorate, the one you call home, the one you defend. Emotional attachment builds that prison using comfort, familiarity, and hope. It makes captivity feel meaningful. It makes limitation feel virtuous. It makes endurance feel noble. And it makes freedom feel selfish. And yet, beneath all of this, there is a quiet tension, a subtle discomfort, a barely audible scream inside you, a sense that something is wrong, that you are shrinking, that you are betraying something essential, that you are dimming your own intensity to preserve connection. that you are abandoning your truth to maintain belonging. That whisper grows louder with time, but most people drown it with distraction, denial, and rationalization, because listening to it would require dismantling the very bonds that define their world. And this is where the cliff forms. Because once you truly understand the mechanics of emotional attachment, once you see how deeply it governs your decisions, your reactions, your fears, your compromises, there is no going back to ignorance. You either remain inside the prison knowingly, or you prepare to walk through psychological fire to reclaim your autonomy. And that moment, the moment when awareness collides with fear, is where everything begins to fracture. There is a moment when you realize that caring too much is not kindness, it is exposure, and exposure is an invitation for control, because the world does not move around empathy, it moves around leverage, and leverage is born where emotions run deep. Indifference is not coldness. It is not cruelty. It is not emptiness. It is insulation. It is the psychological armor that allows you to stand unmoved while others tremble. It is the calm surface beneath chaos. It is the ability to watch storms pass without letting them rewrite your internal order. When you become indifferent, not to life, but to the need for validation, approval, reaction, and emotional return, something inside you sharpens. Your mind clears. Your posture changes. Your presence thickens. People feel it before they understand it. They sense distance. They sense gravity. They sense that you are no longer easy to touch. And when they cannot touch you, they cannot move you. When they cannot move you, they cannot command you. Indifference is not the absence of emotion. It is mastery over it. It is choosing not to bleed where predators feed. It is choosing not to beg where power is measured. It is the quiet refusal to make your inner world dependent on anyone else's behavior. Most people live in emotional slavery without ever naming it. They rise and fall based on external responses. A compliment lifts them. A silence crushes them. A message excites them. A delay destabilizes them. Their nervous system becomes a hostage to reactions they cannot control. Their mood becomes a reflection of other people's moods. Their confidence becomes a mirror of external approval. This is the architecture of psychological weakness. When your emotional state is dictated by others, you no longer govern yourself. You become reactive. You become predictable. You become manageable. And predictability is the foundation of control. The more someone can forecast your emotional responses, the easier it becomes to manipulate your decisions. Indifference disrupts this pattern. It introduces uncertainty. It creates distance. It makes your inner movements unreadable. And what cannot be read cannot be directed. There is a deep power in emotional silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of sovereignty. The silence that does not explain itself. The silence that does not seek to be understood. The silence that does not rush to justify. When you stop reacting, people begin to reveal themselves. Their intentions surface. Their strategies become visible. Their insecurities leak through their words. Because in the absence of your emotional feedback, they lose their reference point. They do not know how to position themselves. They do not know how to steer you. They do not know how to provoke or pacify. And that uncertainty creates discomfort. Discomfort creates exposure. Exposure reveals truth. Indifference shifts the entire power dynamic. The one who cares less always holds more leverage. Not because they are heartless, but because they are not enslaved by outcome. When you are unattached to results, you can act with precision. You can withdraw without hesitation. You can refuse without guilt. You can observe without distortion. You can speak without fear. And this freedom terrifies those who depend on emotional influence to navigate the world. They sense the loss of control. They feel the absence of hooks. They realize there is nothing to pull, nothing to threaten, nothing to promise. And so they begin to adapt around you, to appease, to impress, to pursue, to adjust. The axis of power shifts silently. Indifference also strips illusions. When you stop caring about being liked, respected, admired, or included, you begin to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. You notice patterns instead of intentions. You observe behavior instead of listening to words. You track consistency instead of excuses. And slowly, the emotional fog lifts. You realize how much human interaction is driven by self-interest, insecurity, and survival instincts. You see how often kindness is transactional, how loyalty is conditional, how affection is strategic, how morality bends under pressure. These realizations do not make you bitter, they make you clear. And clarity is dangerous. Clarity dismantles narratives. Clarity dissolves emotional manipulation. Clarity exposes the mechanics behind social performance. When you are indifferent, you no longer rush to fill silence. You allow awkwardness to breathe. You let tension linger. You let uncertainty stretch. And in those spaces, people reveal their true motivations. Those who need validation scramble. Those who seek dominance escalate. Those who crave attention perform. Those who fear abandonment chase. You remain still. You watch. You learn. Stillness becomes your lens. And through that lens, you see the hidden laws of human behavior operating in real time. Indifference also rewires your internal hierarchy. Instead of placing others above yourself, you anchor your emotional center within. You become the primary source of your own stability. Your mood no longer swings violently. Your reactions soften. Your impulses weaken. You gain the ability to pause. And in that pause, choice emerges. Choice is power. The space between stimulus and response is where control lives. Indifference expands that space. It gives you room to breathe, to think, to calculate. It slows the world down. It allows you to move deliberately while others rush blindly. This is why indifference has always been misunderstood. The emotional mind sees it as apathy. The wounded mind sees it as cruelty. The dependent mind sees it as rejection. But the disciplined mind recognizes it as sovereignty. It is the refusal to surrender internal authority. It is the decision to govern your emotional economy. It is the commitment to remain unowned. Because once you are owned emotionally, everything else follows. The hardest part about indifference is not developing it. It is surviving the withdrawal. Because emotional dependency behaves like addiction. When you stop feeding it, your mind panics. It screams. It invents reasons to reconnect. It magnifies loneliness. It romanticizes memory. It amplifies fear. It tells you that you are losing something essential. But what you are losing is not love. You are losing attachment. And attachment is the drug that keeps you compliant. The discomfort of emotional withdrawal is the price of liberation. And most people are unwilling to pay it. They would rather remain comfortable prisoners than uncomfortable sovereigns. Indifference also challenges identity. When you no longer define yourself through relationships, roles collapse. You are no longer the caretaker, the rescuer, the pleaser, the supporter, the entertainer, the listener. You become undefined. And undefined states feel threatening. They strip familiarity. They dissolve certainty. But they also create space. Space for reconstruction. Space for evolution. Space for power. Because power cannot grow inside cramped identities. It needs emptiness. It needs silence. It needs emotional stillness. The moment you stop reacting, you step outside the psychological battlefield. You stop engaging in emotional skirmishes. You withdraw your energy from endless micro-conflicts. You no longer argue to be understood. You no longer defend to be respected. You no longer explain to be accepted. You simply exist. And that existence becomes heavy. Others feel the weight. They feel the lack of access. They sense that you are no longer available for emotional labor. And that absence forces them to confront their own emptiness. Indifference is also a mirror. It reflects people back to themselves. Without your emotional participation, they must face their own insecurity, their own craving, their own instability. Many cannot tolerate this. They become agitated. They escalate behavior. They provoke. They test boundaries. They seek reactions. And when none arrive, frustration surfaces. Anger appears. Desperation leaks. This is where true dynamics reveal themselves. Not in comfort, but in deprivation. In social hierarchies, indifference elevates status. Those who are emotionally neutral appear unbothered. Those who are unbothered appear confident. Those who appear confident are assumed powerful. It is a primal equation. Emotional composure signals dominance. Emotional volatility signals vulnerability. This is why leaders cultivate stoicism. Why strategists suppress impulsivity. Why rulers maintain distance. They understand that emotional exposure invites challenge. Emotional detachment commands respect. Indifference also protects you from psychological warfare. Guilt loses its grip. Shame loses its leverage. Fear loses its voice. Because these tools require emotional investment to function. When you are indifferent, you observe these tactics without absorbing them. You feel the attempt, but not the impact. You recognize the manipulation, but not the sting. And this insulation creates an inner fortress. A place where your mind remains intact while external forces crash against it. But this path is not comfortable. Emotional detachment isolates. It separates you from the warmth of belonging. It distances you from shared vulnerability. It places you outside collective emotional rhythms. And that loneliness is profound, because humans are wired to connect, to attach, to bond, to synchronize. Indifference disrupts this wiring. It makes you an outsider, a watcher, a solitary observer. And in that solitude, you confront yourself without distraction. Your fears surface. Your insecurities echo. Your unresolved pain rises. There is no external noise to drown it out. And many retreat at this stage. They run back to attachment, back to emotional dependency, back to comforting illusions. Because facing the self is more terrifying than submitting to others. Yet those who endure this isolation discover something rare. A stillness beneath the noise. A clarity beneath confusion. A strength beneath fragility. They realize that emotional independence does not remove feeling. It refines it. It purifies it. It transforms raw impulse into deliberate experience. They begin to choose when to care, when to engage, when to invest. And that selectivity multiplies impact. Their attention becomes valuable. Their presence becomes significant. Their words become weighty. Because scarcity creates value. And indifference creates emotional scarcity. This is the paradox. By caring less, you become more influential. By needing less, you become more desired. By detaching, you attract. By withdrawing, you command. Not through manipulation, but through psychological gravity. People are drawn to those who do not chase. They respect those who do not beg. They follow those who do not plead. Because indifference signals self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency is magnetic. Yet, this power carries danger. Indifference can become armor so thick that nothing penetrates. It can harden into emotional isolation. It can calcify into disconnection. It can transform into superiority. And in that extreme, humanity erodes. The challenge is balance. Sovereignty without cruelty. Distance without emptiness. Detachment without dehumanization. But balance requires awareness. And awareness requires confrontation with uncomfortable truths. The deeper truth is this: emotional attachment gives others power over your narrative. Indifference returns authorship to you. When you no longer care about being perceived in a certain way, you stop performing. You stop curating. You stop editing your identity. You allow yourself to exist raw, undefined, unpredictable. And unpredictability dismantles control structures. Systems rely on behavioral patterns. Social hierarchies rely on compliance. Emotional economies rely on exchange. Indifference withdraws participation. And when participation ends, structures weaken. This is why indifference feels dangerous. Because it threatens existing orders. It destabilizes relational contracts. It disrupts expectations. It refuses silent agreements. It breaks emotional bargains. And people resist that. They try to rehook you, to re-engage you, to reattach you, to pull you back into the familiar dance of reaction and response. They offer affection. They provoke anger. They incite guilt. They trigger nostalgia. They awaken fear. Anything to restore emotional leverage. And this is the final test. To remain still while the world pulls. Because the true measure of indifference is not silence. It is restraint. The restraint to not explain. The restraint to not justify. The restraint to not react. The restraint to not chase. The restraint to not repair. The restraint to not rescue. Each restraint strengthens internal authority. Each refusal sharpens sovereignty. Each pause deepens control. And eventually, a shift occurs. You begin to feel an unfamiliar calm. A deep internal steadiness. A sense of self that does not flicker. A presence that does not seek. A mind that does not beg. You become anchored. And in that anchoring, the world rearranges itself around you. Relationships transform. Dynamics invert. Hierarchies realign. Because power always orients toward emotional neutrality. But there is a final layer, one that few reach. The realization that indifference is not merely a tactic. It is a philosophy, a worldview, a way of existing beyond emotional compulsion. It is the acceptance that nothing external can complete you, that no bond can define you, that no approval can elevate you, that no rejection can diminish you. It is the internalization of self-sufficiency, and once internalized, it becomes irreversible. And that is where the real danger begins. Because when nothing can move you, nothing can guide you. When nothing can wound you, nothing can soften you. When nothing can reach you, you stand alone with your own will. And that will, unrestrained, unmediated, untempered, becomes something vast, something heavy, something that reshapes everything it touches. And the question that emerges in that stillness is not whether you are ready to hold power, but whether you are prepared to face what you might become once nothing else controls you. There comes a moment when the illusion of comfort collapses, when the soft lies you built your life around begin to rot from the inside, and the weight of your own stagnation becomes unbearable, because deep down you know that everything familiar has slowly turned into a cage, and the walls are not made of fear but of habits, excuses, and emotional safety. You feel it in the quiet hours, in the heaviness that settles on your chest when the world goes silent, in the dull ache that reminds you that you are not becoming what you could become. Comfort whispers that you deserve peace, rest, softness, ease. But comfort never tells you that it is also the architect of mediocrity, the guardian of stagnation, the executioner of potential. Identity does not emerge from safety. It is carved from conflict, forged in chaos, and sharpened by pain. And every time you choose comfort over confrontation, you postpone your evolution. You delay the birth of the person you were meant to become. Destruction is misunderstood because it is feared. The mind associates destruction with loss, with collapse, with chaos, with suffering. But there is another form of destruction that operates beneath the surface, quiet, surgical, precise. It is the dismantling of outdated identities, inherited beliefs, borrowed values, and conditioned fears. It is the slow disintegration of everything that once defined you but no longer serves you. And this process is violent, not physically, but psychologically. It strips certainty. It dissolves familiarity. It removes emotional anchors. It forces you into a void where the old self dies before the new one is formed. Most people never enter this void. They cling to what is known, even if it is killing them slowly. Because destruction feels like death. And death terrifies the conditioned mind. Yet every powerful identity in history was born from inner annihilation. Before strength, there was collapse. Before clarity, there was confusion. Before authority, there was isolation. The old self must break for the new self to emerge. And that breaking is not poetic. It is not graceful. It is brutal, lonely, disorienting. You lose your sense of belonging. You question your purpose. You doubt your direction. You stand naked in front of your own inadequacy. And in that exposure, something fundamental shifts. You begin to see your illusions. You recognize your excuses. You confront your weaknesses. And for the first time, you stop romanticizing your suffering. You stop justifying your limitations. You stop protecting your comfort. Comfort builds fragile identities. It rewards compliance. It nurtures dependency. It encourages passivity. It teaches you to adapt instead of dominate, to fit instead of define, to follow instead of shape. It conditions you to avoid risk, to fear discomfort, to retreat from challenge. And slowly, without realizing it, you become smaller. Not in potential, but in expression. Your ambition dulls. Your intensity softens. Your hunger fades. You become agreeable, manageable, predictable. And predictability is the signature of domestication. The world does not fear predictable people. It uses them. It positions them. It consumes their energy. It extracts their labor. It shapes their lives. And they call it stability. Destruction interrupts this cycle. It introduces chaos where stagnation once ruled. It destabilizes routines. It fractures narratives. It forces re-evaluation. It compels you to question everything you once accepted. Your beliefs crack. Your identity trembles. Your sense of self dissolves. And in that collapse, raw awareness emerges. You see the mechanisms that shaped you. The social conditioning. The emotional programming. The cultural expectations. The inherited limitations. The silent agreements. You realize how little of who you are was chosen, and how much was imposed. And that realization is devastating, because it exposes how little agency you once had. This is why destruction is resisted so fiercely. It threatens the ego. It dismantles the story you tell yourself about who you are. It reveals uncomfortable truths. That you stayed where you were out of fear, not loyalty. That you tolerated mediocrity out of comfort, not contentment. That you avoided growth out of anxiety, not wisdom. These realizations cut deep. They shatter self-image. They dissolve pride. They force humility. And humility is unbearable for the ego. So most people retreat. They return to distraction, to entertainment, to routine, to noise. Anything to avoid facing the emptiness that follows identity collapse. But those who remain in the void discover something rare. A silence beneath the chaos. A stillness beneath the fear. A clarity beneath the confusion. In that space, stripped of labels and expectations, you encounter your raw will. Not the conditioned desires. Not the borrowed ambitions. But the primal drive that exists beneath social identity. You feel a hunger that does not ask for permission. A pull toward intensity. A craving for expansion. A demand for dominance over your own limitations. And this is where reconstruction begins. Not from comfort, but from confrontation. You no longer ask what feels good. You ask what builds strength. You no longer seek comfort. You seek clarity. You no longer avoid pain. You analyze it. You no longer chase happiness. You cultivate resilience. And through this shift, a new identity crystallizes. One that is not reactive, not dependent, not fragile, but grounded, centered, self-directed. Yet, even at this stage, the process is incomplete. Because destruction is not a one-time event. It is a cycle. As you evolve, new identities form. And eventually, they too must be dismantled. Growth demands continuous death. Continuous shedding. Continuous rebirth. The moment you become attached to who you are, stagnation begins again. And so the cycle repeats. Collapse. Reconstruction. Expansion. Collapse. Each iteration carving deeper awareness. Each descent sharpening perception. Each ascent expanding capacity. This endless cycle is the price of transcendence, and few are willing to pay it. Most prefer stability, predictability, routine. They trade potential for peace. They exchange greatness for comfort, and they call it balance. But balance without growth is decay, and decay, when ignored, becomes death. As you move deeper into this process, a quiet realization emerges, that the person you once were is no longer accessible, that the life you once lived no longer fits, that the future you once imagined no longer resonates. You stand at the edge of something undefined, something vast, something heavy, and you sense that the next phase will demand even greater sacrifice, even deeper destruction, even more profound solitude. And this is where the path narrows, where hesitation becomes fatal, where retreat becomes tempting, where the mind begs for familiarity, because beyond this threshold lies a version of you that cannot coexist with your past, a version that will sever old ties, abandon old dreams, reject old limitations, a version that will operate from cold clarity rather than emotional comfort. And as you stand at this edge, stripped of illusions, separated from familiarity, suspended between who you were and who you might become, the question is no longer whether you are capable of transformation, but whether you are prepared to survive what must die for it to occur.